A cop's worst nightmare. Arresting the wrong person. And Sergeant Calloway just made the biggest mistake of his career. The sun sits high in the sky, beating down on the quiet streets of Brookfield, a well-kept neighborhood in Ohio. It's the kind of place where the sidewalks are lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, where morning joggers move in rhythm, and where police patrols are routine but rarely necessary. Sergeant Brian Calloway cruises through, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lazily on the radio. 20 years on the force. And he's seen it all, or so he tells himself. He's got a reputation, tough, direct, doesn't take excuses. He believes in his own version of justice. And in his eyes, people who don't belong in certain areas always warrant a second look up ahead. He spots her, a black woman, mid-40s, toned, confident stride. She's jogging at a steady pace, her earbuds in, lost in her own world. Expensive running shoes, sleek athletic gear. She looks like she belongs. But something about her unsettles him. Maybe it's the fact that she doesn't glance in his direction. Most people at least acknowledge a police cruiser when it passes. She doesn't. Maybe it's the car she jogged past, a silver Tesla parked in a driveway. Did she just come from there? Or is she casing houses? Or maybe it's nothing at all. Still. Calloway pulls over. The tires crunch against the pavement as he steps out. He places a firm hand on his duty belt, not reaching for anything, just making sure it's noticed. His eyes lock on her as she slows down, yanking out one earbud. She's breathing hard but controlled, wiping a bit of sweat from her forehead. She barely looks fazed by his presence. Something wrong, officer? She asks, still catching her breath. Coming from him, his voice is steady, edged with that quiet authority he's mastered over the years. She blinks, glancing up the street before answering. Home. Just getting in my run. Where's home? She tilts her head slightly, something shifting in her expression. Couple blocks down. Got ID on you? There it is. The moment shifts. Her face hardens just a fraction, the casual ease in her posture tightening. For what? Calloway lifts his chin slightly, studying her. He doesn't like being questioned. Just need to make sure everything checks out. She exhales sharply, hands on her hips. You pulled over to stop a woman jogging in broad daylight because you think I'm a threat? He doesn't say yes. But he doesn't say no either. She huffs a short laugh, reaching for her phone. You know what? Let's just call someone who actually enforces the law correctly. Calloway steps forward, not aggressively, not violently, but deliberately. Mom, I'm not going to ask again. Show me some identification. Her fingers tighten around her phone. Calloway notices, and in his mind, the situation has officially escalated, but he doesn't realize he's making the biggest mistake of his career. The street is still. The only sounds are the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of distant traffic. But for Simone Daniels, the world has narrowed down to the man in front of her, the officer standing too close. The weight of his stare pressing down like an unseen force. She knows this routine, knows the pattern, knows what happens when someone like her challenges someone like him, but she also knows her rights. I'm not required to carry it. While jogging, she says evenly. Calloway shifts, adjusting his stance. That's. Her voice is calm, unwavering, but Calloway sees it differently. To him, it's defiance. He glances around. The street is mostly empty. Just a few houses with drawn blinds. One or two people in their yards, subtly watching. No one stepping in. I'm investigating suspicious activity, he says, voice clipped. What activity? Calloway pauses. He didn't expect to be challenged like this. You were running past a home with a high-value vehicle in the driveway, he says, as if that justifies everything. Simone laughs. But there's no humor in it. You mean the Tesla? So now jogging past a parked car is a crime? Calloway's jaw tightens. You're refusing to identify yourself. I'm refusing to be harassed. That word, harassed, makes something burn in Calloway's chest. His authority being called into question. In broad daylight, in front of strangers, he takes a step closer. You're resisting my investigation. Simone's expression hardens. I'm resisting nothing. You're abusing your badge. And you know it. Her hand twitches near her phone. Calloway doesn't think. He reacts. He grabs her wrist. It happens fast. The shift from words to action. One moment, she's standing her ground. The next, he's pulling her arm behind her back. Metal cuffs flashing in the sun. What the hell? She shouts, struggling against his grip. You're under arrest for obstruction, Calloway says automatically, like he's reading from a script. People stop. Stare. A man on his porch sets down his coffee. A woman pulls out her phone. The street is watching. His porch. He pulls out his phone. Recording. A woman across the street watches. Frozen in place. You're making a mistake. Simone grits out, fighting to keep her voice controlled. Calloway tightens the cuffs, ignoring the eyes on him. You should have cooperated. Simone exhales sharply through her nose. Her pulse pounds in her ears. But her voice is steady when she speaks. You don't even know who I am. Calloway doesn't care. But he should. Because his world is about to come crashing down. The steel of the cuffs digs into Simone's wrists as Calloway tightens his grip, pressing her arms behind her back. Her chest rises and falls. Controlled but tense. She's been here before. Not in these exact cuffs. Not in this exact moment. But she knows this feeling. The weight of power being abused. Calloway doesn't see the problem. He sees a win. Another suspect neutralized. Another moment where he gets to walk away feeling like he's in control. But the world around him is shifting. A small crowd is forming. A man across the street keeps recording. His phone steady, capturing every second. A woman standing near her mailbox calls out. She wasn't doing anything. Calloway ignores them. He presses his radio. Dispatch. I have a 10 to 15. Female suspect. Refusing to identify herself. Sending for transport. Simone laughs under her breath. You really think this is going to go your way? Huh? Calloway doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. The law is on his side. Or at least, that's what he's always believed. Another voice cuts through the air. Excuse me, officer. What's going on here? A man in his 50s. Well dressed. An air of authority that doesn't match the moment. The rest of the bystanders watch. His suit jacket is slung over one shoulder, and his eyes flick from Simone to Calloway. Calloway doesn't flinch. "Sir, please stand back." The man doesn't move. Instead, he looks at Simone, then at the cuffs, then back at Calloway. "I asked what's going on." She was being uncooperative. Calloway says, his voice firm but slipping. Just slightly. The man tilts his head. "Uncooperative?" Simone exhales sharply, shaking her head. "He stopped me while I was jogging. Asked for ID. I told him I didn't need to carry one. Now here we are." The man looks back at Calloway. "You arrested her for jogging?" She refused to comply with an investigation. The man's expression darkens. "That so?" Calloway can feel the shift. The weight in the air is different. He notices the way people are watching. The way the man standing in front of him isn't afraid. A black SUV pulls up, tinted windows, unmarked plates. The kind of vehicle Calloway knows belongs to someone with pull. The driver's door opens, and out steps Captain Ronald Briggs, Calloway's commanding officer, and he looks pissed. The crowd parts just slightly as Briggs strides toward them. His eyes locked on Calloway. The tension is thick. Calloway straightens, trying to maintain his stance of control. But something feels off. Briggs stops a few feet away, glancing between Calloway and Simone, who is still in cuffs. His jaw tightens and then he says two words that hit Calloway like a sledgehammer. "Uncuff her." Calloway blinks. "Sir." Briggs steps forward. "I said uncuff her. Now." Calloway hesitates. This doesn't make sense. His boss is ordering him to release a suspect. Briggs turns to Simone. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Are you hurt?" Simone shakes her head slowly. "I'm fine." Calloway's stomach sinks. Briggs exhales. The street is quiet, a heavy stillness hanging in the air. Calloway's eyes widen as he stares at the woman he's just handcuffed. The weight of her presence starting to settle on him. The silence is broken by Briggs. His voice low but filled with anger. "Do you even know who you just put in handcuffs?" Briggs asks. Calloway's grip on the cuffs falters, his breath catching in his throat. He swallows hard. "Sir." She refused to identify herself. He explains, his voice shaky. Briggs steps forward, his voice now colder, more cutting. "That's because she doesn't have to." The tension crackles in the air. Simone watches Calloway, calm and measured. She speaks, her tone controlled but firm. "My name is Chief Simone Daniels." Calloway freezes. The words hit him like a sudden gust of wind, knocking the air from his lungs. Then, her voice sharpens, every word landing like a stone on the earth. "And you just arrested your boss." The shock is immediate. Calloway's breath catches, his mind racing to understand the magnitude of what's just happened. His chest tightens as the full weight of her words presses down on him. Simone's eyes are steady, watching him closely. She lets the silence linger, letting him feel the heat of his mistake, before continuing with a voice that has no room for hesitation. "You just humiliated me, treated me like some kind of threat. In front of everyone." Briggs' voice slices through the air, his anger palpable. "I said, uncuff her. Now." Calloway's hands move with haste, fumbled and nervous, but he follows the command without a second thought. As the cuffs come off, Simone rubs her wrists. The red marks left behind a silent reminder of the humiliation she endured. The crowd remains quiet, watching, phones still recording the moment. The man in the suit stands at a distance, his gaze fixed on Calloway with an intensity that makes his skin crawl. The tension between them lingers in the air, a heavy reminder of the gravity of what just took place. Close to shame, Simone takes a deep breath. She is calm, yet a sharpness flickers in her eyes that Calloway cannot ignore. She rolls her shoulders, preparing herself before turning to face him directly. "You think your badge gives you the right to stop whoever you want?" Her voice is steady, but it cuts through the air, sharp and clear like the arrow's flight. "You think jogging while black is a crime?" Calloway opens his mouth, then shuts it. No words come. Nothing he can say will explain his actions or make them sound just. Simone tilts her head, observing him closely. "I watched you make a decision today. I watched you decide that I didn't belong here. You didn't know who I was. And that was enough for you to see me as a threat." Calloway shifts his weight, feeling heat rush to his face. But he cannot break her gaze. Simone steps forward, her voice lowering, speaking only to him now, in the way of one who knows the weight of their words. "You put your hands on me. You humiliated me. You were ready to throw me into the back of your transport for nothing. And if I weren't wearing this uniform, you know how this could have ended." Calloway's throat tightens, his hands twitching at his sides. Simone leans in closer, her presence overwhelming. "How many others have you done this to?" The question strikes deep, heavier than any stone or spear. The answer, unspoken, weighs on him. The truth he cannot deny. Briggs steps forward. His voice is firm, grounded in authority. "Sergeant Calloway, you are relieved of duty until further notice. Hand over your badge and weapon." The words are like a blow to the chest, sharper than any blade. Calloway's fingers hover over his belt. His pride pulls at him. But the reality of the moment settles in. The silence between them stretches, thick with unspoken understanding. Slowly, he unclips his badge and places it in Briggs' waiting hand. He then unholsters his sidearm. His heart hammers in his chest. But there is no escape from the truth. The man forces his face to remain still. Simone watches him for what feels like an eternity. There's no triumph in her gaze, no arrogance, just a quiet, heavy disappointment. Slowly, she exhales and shakes her head. "You need to look deep within yourself, Sergeant. Because after today, everything changes." Calloway says nothing. What could he possibly say? The weight of his choices presses heavily against his chest as he steps away. The camera still records. The murmurs of the crowd persist. But what burdens him the most isn't the loss of his badge. It's the understanding that today, he didn't just make a mistake. He exposed himself. And there's no returning from that. Calloway sits in his vehicle, staring at the steering wheel. The engine is silent. His hands rest lightly on his lap, fingers almost curled, as though they still remember the weight of the cuffs he once placed around her wrists. His badge, His gun, both are gone. His career, once secure, now hangs by the thinnest of threads. The air around him feels thick, suffocating. Finally, he lifts his gaze, watching the neighborhood stretch out in front of him. The same calm street, the same neatly tended bushes, the same homes that looked so ordinary only moments ago. But now, everything is different. He watches as Chief Simone Daniel stands beside her SUV, conversing with Briggs. Her body remains composed, but there's a fire within her eyes that he cannot ignore. He sees how the onlookers regard her, not as a threat, not as a suspect, but as a leader. The gravity of his actions settles deep within him. For the first time in years, Calloway doesn't know who he is anymore. He had prided himself on being a man of the law. He thought of himself as fair, only taking action when it was truly needed. His instincts had always been right. But today his instincts were wrong. And it cost him everything. Briggs finished speaking at last and moved toward his vehicle. Simone turned, locking eyes with Calloway through the windshield. She held his gaze for a long time, then slowly shook her head, just once, before climbing into her SUV and driving off. Calloway watched her tail lights fade away. His chest felt tight. He exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. A year ago, he would have found a way to justify what happened. He would have convinced himself that he was in the right, that she was just another person making a scene. But now, he didn't know, and that was what scared him the most. Power doesn't always come from a badge or a uniform. Sometimes it comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. Calloway had thought he was in control, that he understood justice. But justice isn't about who holds the power. It's about how that power is used. How many times has this happened to someone who didn't have a title to protect them? How many have been thrown into handcuffs for doing nothing at all? This story isn't just about one bad cop making a mistake. It's about a system that allows mistakes like this to continue. So the real question is, when will it stop? And who will rise to change it?